Gather around, kids, and learn the old lore. Once upon a time back in the olden days, you could get comics pretty much everywhere. I grew up in very rural Pennsylvania in the 80s. I could get comics at every gas station and grocery store. Sometimes very strange ones, as one tiny store sold Ninja Warrior, Kung Fu Warrior, and Thrasher? Skateboarding Vigilante. All those were by the same company, and I appear to be, other than a friend of mine who actually worked for them, the only person who remembers them. The direct market. I'm Justin Jordan, this is Death or Comics, and I'm telling you all that not because I'm getting rambly in my old age, but so I can tell you about the direct market. If you'd like to read this instead of hearing me shout at clouds, click the link down below to sign up for the Death or Comics newsletter. It's free, and we'll send you quick start guides to writing and pitching, free comics, and whatever else we can think of, and you can quit at any time. My point with all that is you really could get comics pretty much everywhere. The selection might not be great, the choices might range from eclectic to genuinely random, but they were distributed like magazines because, well, that's what they were. And like magazines, part of the reason they could be sold like this was that periodicals were sold on a returnable basis. Meaning if they didn't sell the comics, they mostly didn't have to pay for them. Despite the name, most magazines and comics were destroyed rather than actually returned, but you get the gist. This is still how bookstores generally operate, complete with destruction. The direct market changed that. For various reasons, the newsstand market, although it wasn't just newsstands, began to collapse in the mid-80s. And so a market arose where comics weren't being sold as returnable. This was good for the publishers, good for comic book stores, and debatably good for comics. The problem was the direct market eventually became the market, and comics at the newsstand withered away. Most magazines did eventually, although it would take a while. This had a couple of notable effects, and one is that people who might otherwise have gotten into comics just no longer had the exposure. Which is, eventually, why this is in the Basics series I've accidentally started. Because in North America, when we talk about comics, we're usually talking about the direct market. Specialty stores selling singles and collected editions on a largely non-returnable basis. We shorthand this as just comics, but it isn't. Currently in 2025, when I am writing and recording this, it isn't even the dominant one in terms of sales of readers. Web comics, the bookstore, library market, manga, they all sell more. But the direct market and the constraints of it have really shaped what we call comics. I think this matters because it sets up a lot of the constraints of the singles and trades, which I talked about in the other Basics videos. Those exist, as they do now, because they're shaped by the market and the way we conceptualize comics. Which is a really long-winded way of saying that if you go to, say, France, the default mode for comics is relatively slim but much longer than American singles in hardcover format. In Japan, it's manga, usually, but not always appearing, first serialized in massive magazines. These shape both of the forms of comics in ways that are often subtle. Not all of the reason that manga comics are decompressed and tend to be less detailed is because they're expected to be produced quickly for serialization. The market affects the physical object, which affects the creative choices. In the direct market, the default mode is a single with 20 to 22 pages of story content. This is because of the direct market and the big players in it. The whole history of this is way too long for this video, and frankly, I'm not that much of an expert. But we decided on 22 pages, and that shapes, and again, informs the creativity. If your goal is to make comics, you should think about what you mean by that. If you're thinking about direct market comics, and if you're listening to this, the odds are pretty decent that you are, then you need to consider the things that shape how you're going to be telling stories, what the expectations and givens are. Note, though, you don't have to do comics this way. The expectations are what a specific market for a specific kind of product has. You can create to that, or not. You might have the direct market preconceived notions about comics, or you might not. But you should, and now hopefully do, understand how economics shape creative expectations before you start. If this video was useful, or at least didn't cause you to lapse into a coma, maybe give us a like, hit the subscribe button, or check us out at deathorcomics.com.